Signore e signori, buonasera. MtMG Guru e Round
Good evening,
Reading
ladies and
sta per
gentlemen. Meet
iniziare.
the Media Guru
Vi
around
invitiamo a
reading
non
is about to
spegnere
start.
cellulari e
Please
tablet
don't
per
switch off
condividere
your
idee,
mobile phones,
spunti e
smartphones and
suggestioni
tablets
con noi.
so you can share
L'hashtag
ideas
della
and
serata
suggestions with
è
us. Hashtag
MeetWolf.
tonight is
Be
Meet
social,
Wolf.
be
Be
MtMG
social,
Guru.
be Meet the Media Guru.
Eccoci qua, buonasera.
Okay, here we go. Buonasera, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Thank you for joining us here at Meet. Now, if you don't know this place, Meet, well, this is much, much more than this room. It's a center also funded by the Cariplo Foundation that we now have here in Milan. We want to work on art and digital culture. So this is the right location for initiatives, events, meetings, debates, and roundtables in order to think about going digital. So all together, we sit and share, ideas on the big changes going on. We would like, of course, to if you will, live better if at all possible. Because, of course, if we understand what's happening in general around us, of course, we are more aware of the processes that are disrupting our life. Now, some years ago, I could have said, okay, let me tell you why it's necessary to understand digital culture. Well, it's now very clear that thanks to the digital environments that we will be talking about tonight, of course, we are very familiar with this. I mean, it's in us and all around us. Okay, so basically, it's an environment in which we have to live. Now, first and foremost, let me say thank you to Maryanne Wolf with a big, big round of applause. Okay, so well, at last back to an applause. Okay, not a virtual one, a real physical one. Thank you so much, Maryanne, for accepting our invitation. This is a project that Meet is organizing for Fondazione Cariplo, so the local bank's foundation, on reawakening passion for reading. I mean, understanding mechanisms, templates, ways, or even ideas to really understand the change which is going on right now. Also, in terms of reading, the digital environments are more and more pervasive, so it's important to be able how to surf or how to swim into this new environment. So together with the Cariplo Foundation, we set a specific target. We would like to explore and investigate, if you will, different issues and the various ways of working, or I should say, ways of living into this new world. So reading in a more and more digital world, a very intangible, virtual world, but it is fortunately still physical. So we put together some meetings. Now the first such meeting was some weeks ago with a team, the Mina Lima, so a team from London. So with Mina Lima, we explored how some elements play in terms of attention and even, attraction of the audience, especially young people, in terms of reading and books. So how can we invite new generations not to miss their contact with books? Tonight with Maryanne Wolf. So once again, it's another around reading meeting. It's a very important meeting. I mean, if you are here, it's because you have understood, I mean, the importance of this meeting. And this is what we want to do. So we want to do a sort of an important exploration to understand the cognitive changes going on right now, to understand the new rules of play, entertainment, learning, and digital systems. We also would like to, discover new rules. Well, maybe very basic rules or even important, rules, so that we can really, really find the right way to, let's say, to assist or to support this process. In my opinion, this is an unavoidable, process. Also in terms of learning. So teaching and learning are also changing, and in particular, with the young generations. Okay, so this is one of the claims we have here. So the more we are aware of the processes going on, the more we, I mean, the better we can use technologies and the better the governance of this new transition towards a society that, of course, will have different ways, different features, and different learning techniques. Okay, then. So, just a couple of quick words on Maryanne. Now, first of all, she's a scholar. I mean, I met her 5 years ago, and I was really, well, amazed. She's a scholar, she's a teacher. She also, well, she's an advocate of children and literacy all around the world. So, this is her mission. An extraordinary person under this perspective. So, once again, a scholar, and she studies the development of the brain who reads. So, main learnings. She spent some years in the research, well, in neurosciences, cognitive neurosciences, psycholinguistics, and development of children and education to create brain circuits for reading. So once again, she will tell us, she will tell us much more about this. So reading is an absolutely necessary asset. Well, another claim we have here, meet digital human and human meets digital. So, of course, it's a two-way dialogue between digital systems and human systems.
direttrice di un nuovo centro
She manages a center for dyslexia and social justice at the UCLA Graduate School for Education Information Studies. She got plenty of awards, and then she published a lot of books and texts. Some of them have been translated in Italian. So let me thank Aurelio Mottola from Vita e Pensiero. They have translated two of the books of Maryanne Wolf that you can also find on the desk outside. I really would like to recommend reading these books. And there's another important thing, which is also a brand new development. She has received an award, actually, from the Pontifical Academy of Science from Rome, and she's one of the 80 members of this Pontifical Academy in Rome for Science. One of the few women. So once again, a double round of applause for Maryanne in an academy that puts together incredible persons, including Maryanne. Okay, Maryanne Wolf, floor is yours. Thank you.
Non parli Italiano.
Okay.
And someday maybe I will, but I love Milano. So maybe I will just absorb you and speak Italian someday. But I want to thank Maria Grazie Matei. She and I met in Spoleto 5 years ago around a dinner table, and she told me her dream. And I thought, oh, what a beautiful dream. But dreams aren't ever looking like this. I am so happy to be here just to experience the realization of a dream of a woman around a table, and here I can be with you. So Maria, grazie. And to all of you who work with her, Alicia, Alessandro, Claudio, I think you called him Claudioetta, but I don't think I should say that. But at any rate, thank you all who are invisible but always visible angels to people like me. And I thank Aurelio, Maria Matola from Vita Pensiero, and Leon, and all those who help us who write books, give them to you. And this last book that I wrote, Lettore di Casa, is really a set of letters. And in a certain way, I want to have a little fun with you. You will disagree with a great deal of what I have to say, but my purpose is to make you think. My purpose as a neuroscientist, as an educator, is to try to bring to the public a dialogue. And so my last book really was a set of letters that was attempting to make a dialogue with people who not just agree with me, but who in our disagreement can help propel the future. So I am going to be talking to you about reading, about literacy, something that many of you take totally for granted. And yet it is the very platform for thought in this our century. And for me, from a political viewpoint, it is a basic human right that I hope to bring in various ways to children, especially children in places where there are no schools, where there are no teachers, and where, and you will hear me have two hats, where I take digital devices to help them learn to read. So you will not be comfortable with any one position from me, because it is my task to help us understand both the opportunities and the challenges that are happening as literacy changes. Now, the first statement I simply want to make is that literacy changes your brain. You were never born to read. This literacy, this act of reading is only 6,000 years old. And we had to create a circuit. There's no genes. You know, there's genes for language, and a child simply has to be born into an environment, and the genetic program unfolds. The same thing with hearing and seeing and thinking and running. No, not so for reading. Literacy builds a new circuit in your brain, which changes the trajectory of your life. Now, some of you automatically are saying, what about those people who come from cultures that are non-literate? Am I talking about the one is superior to the other? I am not. I am talking, however, about what reading has done and can do for the life trajectory of an individual, for a society, and indeed, as we change in a digital culture, how we read will affect the future of our species. It is a very big gamble if we do not know the knowledge that I'm only going to give you a glimpse of, and that is evolving as I speak. Now, Walter Ong, a philosopher who wrote in a way like Marshall McLuhan, but much more philosophically, said technologies are not mere exterior aids, but also interior transformations of consciousness, and never more than when they affect the word. Now, I give very different talks in different places. Was anyone at Université Católica on Monday? Was anyone there? I'm so glad. But with that talk, I emphasized more the changes in words, in language. But Walter Ong makes us realize that technologies, that all of us in this room, in this gorgeous building, and it's not just a building. This is a place for creativity and innovation. All of us who are involved in that have to understand how that changes language. And I come to you with a very difficult position because there are no binaries. My MIT colleague and friend, Sherry Turkle, said this in a book that some of you might have read, Alone Together. We transgress. We make a mistake, not because we try to build the new, but because we do not allow ourselves to consider what it disrupts or diminishes. My talk to you who are undoubtedly an audience of innovative thinkers, I need you more than people who work with me, to think about what you disrupt or diminish in your innovations. I give talks in Silicon Valley where some people in the beginning think I have a single-minded position. I do not. And in fact, when I spoke to them last, the most common word in Silicon Valley is disrupt. We are the disruptors. Well, I am the disruptor of the disruptors. I want to be. I want to be because we must try to always understand what our new and novel ideas do to change what came before. Now, I have something very lucky, like an ace up my sleeve, and that is cognitive neuroscience studies what it takes to learn something new and what impedes it. And so one of the questions that Maria Grazzi wanted me to pursue, how does the understanding of the reading brain's plasticity help us have a more hopeful approach to transitioning to the digital culture? So in just about 2 minutes, you are going to come with me as if you're my students for one moment in time, and we're going to think about what a reading circuit is. Let's call it the origin story of reading. It begins with the fact that I said before. No genes, no one region. Rather, what the brain had to do with numeracy, with literacy, with anything new, is it has to create new connections among the older parts that were and are genetically programmed, like language and vision, cognition and affect, motor. All of this has to be coming together in the act of reading. When people take it for granted as if everybody could just simply learn to read naturally, there is nothing natural about that circuit. It has to develop, and we, as a society, have to help it come together and be connected. Now, with plasticity, there's a caveat. It means there's no one perfect, ideal reading circuit. Rather, the plasticity means that that circuit is going to change according to your writing system, whether you read and write Chinese or have an alphabet, or in Japanese have 2 syllabaries and a logo, kanji is like Chinese. The circuits are going to change according to your writing system. Now, alphabets, this is a very simplistic view. I want you to know this. But if you look at Chinese, what you see is that there is much more in the right hemisphere visual area than in your Italian system or in the English system. Why? Why do you think? You, just tell me, why would that be? Why would your right hemisphere need so much more if you're speaking Chinese? What do you think? Beautiful answer. It may be because the letters aren't phonetic but are symbolizing a concept. Absolutely true. But add to that 5,000 characters to be a 5th grader in China. That requires more of the visual areas to be responding. So I give you this tiny little example because it just shows you the brain changes to reflect the writing system, but it's going to also change according to how it's educated. And even though my talk is not about dyslexia at all, or I'll have one slide, in Italian, I have a lot of concerns because people don't realize that Italian is so regular, you can put letters and sounds together, but the connections can be slower in a form of dyslexia in Italy. I'm always wishing somebody would just hire me for 1 month to tell principals that they can do a better job in Italian about dyslexia. That's not my talk. I shouldn't even tell you that, but I can't help myself. But the third thing, and the really important thing for today's talk, is that that circuit is going to change, not just with what it knows, it learns, but with the medium. The affordances of the medium are going to change the way the circuit processes. Now, because of Maria Grazzi and my conversation with her, she wanted me to talk especially very quickly about the very young and the place of stories and what stories do to us in those early years. And so I want to tell you that that young brain between infancy and 5 is like a computer that's learning all of the things that go into the circuit parts, not connecting them. It is a real, there are people in Italy who have various organizations who know this, and I'm very, very supportive of them. But the reality is many people don't realize that before a child even speaks, they are learning so much about language. And if I could do one thing around the world for parents, it would be to tell them, read, write, and sing to your child. And some people might ask me questions about music. We have a whole neuroscience of music that shows the relationship to reading. So you might ask me a question about that. But the reality is every single book that is read to a child every night is doing an extraordinary job of teaching words. Now, words represent like nodes in your brain, if you will. I'm using that as a metaphor. But the more you hear a word, the more it's represented. Now think of the word represented. Everybody here who had a psychology course studied how things are representations. Well, words are representations, and the more you're exposed, the more life they have, the more permanence they have in that brain. Well, when you read to your child, and some of you have children, some of you will have children, we as a society have to make sure parents from prenatal on realize that what you are doing is increasing not just knowledge of words, but the concepts that are connected to words, the sounds, and very importantly, the affect. I can't ever stress enough how when reading is connected to the affective component, it associates reading with love. Whether we're talking about Thomas Aquinas, talking about how we educate, it's the conjoining of knowing, of knowledge and loving. It happens from the start, or it doesn't. And this is a slide from the United States. I do not believe it would be atypical here. Our very privileged homes, here, these children hear words over and over and over again, and our very underprivileged homes, and it's not about money, it's about knowledge, about the importance of words, or if you have 3 jobs, or if you're trying to, in fact, feed your children, you don't have time to even think about reading every night and expanding their vocabulary, etc. So the reality at kindergarten is that many of our children come with millions of words as a deficit. They do not have them represented. So at 5 years of age, we already have differences in our children. And there's this wonderful passage in Matthew where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. This is unnecessary around the world. this simple piece of knowledge. And for those of you who are immediately thinking, oh, you're working in these places without literacy, it's not just reading books, which, if you can, wonderful, but it's telling stories. It's giving language. It's giving life. It's making words come to life for the next generation. But it also does something else. It teaches children who, if you're a Piagetian, they are ego-centered. And we think of egocentrism often in a negative way, but this is who they are. But reading about frogs and toads and if you're a little older, Harry Potter, reading about others, reading about people who are not like you, causes you to pass over. And you are literally developing a kind of ethic, a platform for social emotional development, from stories as simple as at least a fairy tale. Now, as a neuroscientist, I want to know what's happening in the brain. And the reality is the children who are read to have activation in areas that are responsible for the comprehension of language and the expressive aspect of language. So the children who are being read to, and this study was a study of mothers who come from underprivileged homes. So we wanted to show that it is not about privilege or not privilege, it's about what happens when children are regularly read to. And then luck happens and they reach 5, and they begin to have what all of you have too, but there's a little caveat here. Each of you have developed a regular circuit, and you can decode information with that circuit just like this. It becomes automatic, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But the real point of reading is not decoding. We have to learn it. We have to learn those foundational skills, make it automatic. But the real point, as Proust said better than anyone, at the heart of reading, we go beyond the wisdom of the author to discover our own. Reading is about the processes that will ultimately lead us to our best thoughts, our most disciplined thinking, our reflection, our contemplation, our ability to think beyond the text. Now, to get there requires a set of very sophisticated cognitive and linguistic and affective processes and motoric processes. I always leave out motoric, but the reality is that when you're reading Anna Karenina, do you remember where she is about to commit suicide, jumping into the tracks, her red bag there? Well, when she leaps, so do your motor neurons. We are extraordinarily immersed when we are reading at a deep level. It begins, however, and very importantly for our children, with an understanding, I should go back one more time, an understanding that background knowledge, making an analogy to what you know, is essential. If that first 5 years you do not develop those concepts, how much more difficult it is to connect the concept with the word as you learn. One of the hardest parts, and Daniela Traficante at Catholic University is doing some of this work with me. One of the most difficult things is that some teachers believe that if they can read the word, they know it. False. We have to be developing background knowledge, internal platforms of knowledge. And that's what we do. We make an analogy. Then, when we make an analogy, we are also adding, it's all interactive, so it doesn't happen in this linear fashion. But we have the capacity to, as I said before, pass over into the thoughts and feelings of another. Now, we can call that empathy, But I need you to realize empathy is not one thing. Could be cognitive empathy, knowing how that thought process of another works, but it can be affective empathy, which leads us to a more compassionate stance. Now, empathy is really our society's moral platform. I used Julian of Norwich. There's a beautiful book recently about Julian of Norwich because she lived through the plague and came out of it with this sense of compassion. And she said, compassion protects, increases our sensitivity, gives life, and heals. This is what we want reading to be able to do. And for those of us who are in science, the last thing we would ever neglect is the importance of fiction. Fiction, whether it's a novel or short story, is, again, a piece of consciousness of other. Now, think what I'm really saying politically right now. I am talking to you from a science viewpoint, but what if our children, what if our youth, what if we are not becoming, going into this passing over of consciousness and becoming ever narrower in what we think about other people? Now, the penultimate, not ultimate, it's so difficult. I'm so sorry. I wish I could say this in Italian. Is it penultimito? Penultimativo? Penultimativo? Something like that. Before the last, but very important, and probably one of the most neglected aspects that's going on right now in digital culture is critical analysis. Critical analysis connects your analogy, what you've read, to what you know. That becomes the basis of inferential thinking. Now, inference is tough. You have to evaluate, you have to think what is really underlying the word, the sentence, the excerpt. Language is not about decoding the surface. Language is going underneath to see what the real meaning is. And it is our best tool for discerning the truth value. Now, I've said this in every talk I've given for the last several months. One of my most worrisome aspects in this research is that I'm seeing this discernment process go missing. I'm seeing critical analysis being replaced by people who go to a familiar silo of information. It's familiar, it confirms, doesn't challenge, it confirms. It's called confirmatory bias. What was thought before rather than gives a different perspective. And when you do this, you are not able to truly discriminate truth or information from disinformation. We'll return to this point. The ultimate point, however, of reading is when we reach this contemplative, reflective piece that allows us to think our own thoughts. It allows us to bring knowledge and love, if you will, the conjoining of knowing and loving. It is the basis of who we, if you will, our sanctuary for where we want to be able to think our best. And it is among you who are so obviously interested in innovation, it's where some of our freshest insights come. But everything I've just said to you takes time. This is going to be the point. We cannot use the deep reading processes without allocation of time from a quality of attention that we give or we do not give. And that's where the medium is going to take a big role in our discussion. Now, deep reading for children takes years to form. It's like the brain is just elaborating. A garden of thoughts are being added and added and added. But for us, it takes milliseconds. You are absolutely unable to perceive yourself, processing deep reading, but you are able to know when you are truly attentive and concentrated and immersed or not. And that brings us to the hard part of my talk, which is the fact that we know reading circuits reflect the medium's affordances. Every medium, this is my colleague, Patricia Greenfield at UCLA, every medium has cost and opportunities, but also weaknesses. But in her work and mine, the cost seems to be deep processing. Now, all of you have all kinds of information about what the digital reader is doing. And there is no question. I spend 10 hours a day on a screen. I am not speaking as someone who only reads books, though in truth, I bookend my day, and I'll tell you that perhaps in question and answers. But the reality is what the screen has as opportunities are just simply extraordinary. We can process massive amounts of information. We can produce massive amounts of information. We can do it with an efficiency that was unknowable even 10 years ago. We can and do multitask. We have, just like this building, interactive forms of communication, new types of creativity. I want to look at the man's name. I will not pronounce it correctly, but Rafiq Anadol. If you haven't seen his exhibit upstairs, you must. This is an extremely beautiful look at how innovation, artificial intelligence, can be not just helping us medically and educationally, but culturally. There is so much that is good. But there are costs, and I need you to know that I'm involved in both the opportunity and the weaknesses. This is an example in Ethiopia, while in Chita, a village where I have worked, and my colleagues in what's called Curious Learning, we have, all of these children have a digital tablet. That's the only light they have in their village. Absolutely no water, no light, no sanitation. But they have, a good percentage of them have begun to become literate. So do not cast stones at me for the rest of my talk. It is not a simple discussion because technology contributes in so many ways, including to those I study in dyslexia. But I'm here to give you information about challenges that you need to deal with because you are the ones who will make the changes. And part of my goal is to give you this information so that you can redress the system itself. Challenge 1, infancy to 5. The pediatricians that I work with are determined to try to help parents not have screens be used as babysitters and caretakers, especially between 0 and 2. Between 2 and 5, gradual use. But the reality is, especially after COVID, parents have been forced. They have no choice in overusing it. But there are repercussions. From the brain standpoint, a little child does not have frontal lobe inhibitory system. They are constantly being distracted. And what happens is they are overstimulated. They are being, their attraction is just whiz, whiz, whiz. But the reality is then when they go off the medium, off the device, what do they say? They must say the same thing here as they do in the United States. What do they say? What does a child say almost automatically after you take the device away and they're sitting there? I'm bored. At least in the United States, everyone answers it the same way. There is a new form of ennui. Now remember what Walter Benjamin said, that boredom can be the hatchbird of creativity. We shouldn't just think boredom is a bad, negative thing. And yet our children are becoming so hyper-stimulated and so easily distracted that they are not looking at boredom as a chance for an opportunity to build a tent or to make something new. Now, from my standpoint, which is what is the development of early literacy, what we see in that 0 to 5 period is that children who are read to by their parents or caretakers or others, if they hear the story read by the parent versus listening in an audio versus seeing the same story on a screen, the reaction in the brain is that the areas, again, for receptive and expressive language are more activated for the parents. And that's better than for audio, and that's better than for the screen's depiction. And you can imagine some of the reasons why, including a certain form of passivity rather than the active imagination, a certain lack of relationship to the print with the person who will elaborate, who will know what's going on or what isn't going on in the reception of those skills. So we have neuroimaging across now all the way through adolescence, looking at those who are reading in the same thing on print versus a screen. And there are more and more data that are troubling. The story is not over. I mean, we're in a hinge moment that has moved into digital, especially after COVID. But there are differences even in PISA scores by adolescents and brain imaging of adolescents who are reading fiction in books versus on the screen all the time. There are differences in the connectivity, the density of connections in the reading circuit that are better for those who are reading books and fiction and not all the time on the screen. So what we're really thinking is that attention is changing in our children in ways that are troublesome. We are not finished with the data, but they are worrisome. It's as if they need this kind of stimulation. Now, games provide another aspect. I'm not going to be talking about games today, but some of you might have questions. My emphasis has to be on reading to keep me in my time span here. Now, the biggest, if you will, attempt, the largest sample ever studied, a meta-analysis by a group, Delgado and Salmoran in Barcelona, took all the studies comparing just reading on a screen versus print, just that, 171,000 subjects. These are young adults. And they were simply asked questions about comprehension of the story and sequencing of the plot. That's all they were doing across all these studies. Fact one, those who read those stories in print were better on comprehension questions. Fact two was a surprise to me. They did a sub-analysis of just the quote-unquote digital natives, the ones in the last few years. What do you say? Put your hands up. Who believes the digital natives were better on the screen? Put your hand up. Who believes they were better on print? Put your hand up. Okay, there's a lot of people without hands here. The reality is they were even better on print than the studies before. So a qualitative analysis was done to find out what's going on. They perceive themselves, and many of you would be in that, some of you might have been in that study. It's all done in Europe. But they were asked, well, what do you think you were better? And they said, oh, of course we were better on the screen. And they said, well, and why? And they said, because we're faster. Here's the problem. Speed has been conflated and confused with insight and knowledge. And you have to help figure out, how do we get habits of mind that are going to enable them to use those deep reading processes on any medium? That's your task. I'm going to give you data, but you are the ones who are going to have to figure it out. And the data are coming fast and furious. You adults, do eye movement research, very clear. Most of you look at a page and you go the top line, it's called a Z or an F effect. Go the top, you zigzag down, you word browse, word spot down, and then go to the bottom. Now, you can do a Z or an F, but what you are doing is skipping the stuff in between, which is why those students missed details of the plot and missed sequencing. They're also doing it, graduate students are doing that with their papers. They are reading papers, the first page, the abstract, a little bit of methodology, and the end. This, as an author, and Calvino always is the person I think of most, Calvino said that, the work it takes to find the perfect articulation, the words that fit the thought best, is an act of love. It's an act of discipline. It's an act of creativity, but it's part of the drive in the language faculty. Whether it's Humboldt or the philosopher Charles Taylor or Flaubert, they all knew that language is what pushes us to think better and deeper. That's what it does. And we're skipping it. We're skimming it. And we're getting the information because there's so much information. We're bombarded, and skimming is our defense default mode. But what does it do ultimately to your ability to concentrate? What does it do to your memory, which is changing? What does it do to the quality of your attention? For me, I have to become a person that I never thought I would be, which is to draw the implications for a political society. This was not what I ever, if you will, began graduate studies for. And yet what I am seeing in the reading brain has led me to realize that we have phenomena like my last president who created policy with tweets. The complexity that is being missed by this drive towards speed is also lending itself to missing the empathic need to understand to understand alternative viewpoints. And ultimately, my worst fear, and I am so proud of Italy in so many ways, but especially in your choice of elected officials, I am most worried about places where people are using social media simply as silos of familiarity, not discerning the truth value, becoming susceptible to, as in my country, especially in those last 5 years ago, false hopes, absolutely falsehood. Alternative facts was used, alternative facts. This is an oxymoron. the susceptibility to disinformation, to what my colleagues, I just came back from the Vatican, are calling the post-truth society. Disinformation is, in the words of Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo, an element of evil for humankind. To believe that we can just have a relativistic attitude towards facts and truth is anti-science. It's anti-humanity. And we have to do something, because those people who exploit it most successfully are demagogues who know just how to use it. And for that reason, I actually chose Umberto Eco and Carlo Maria Martini to say a word to you about democracy. A delicate game is what democracy is. The delicate game of a democracy provides for a dialectic of opinions and beliefs in the hope that such exchange will expand the collective moral conscience that is the basis for orderly cohabitation. For society, for us as a civilization, my last slides are returning us to people who have guided us for millennia, and I use Aristotle. When he was asked what makes for a good society, he said there are 3 lives for a good society. The life of activity and productivity. Is there anything more active and productive than our society right now? So we have this first life in full flesh. Second, the life of enjoyment. I think we could say that our culture has expanded the whole concept, the Greek concept of leisure. And I think this building personifies the unbelievable importance of enjoyment of culture. But the third life, he said, was the life of contemplation as necessary for the good life. And I suggest to you, so too does the reader have 3 lives. The first life, there is no question. We are awash in information and activity and productivity. We are awash in enjoyment and ways that to use our digital devices for such good in terms of leisure. There's also a negative dark side to that. But does it satisfy the third life? Does it lead to us not losing the contemplative function? So the third life for me with reading is to reconceptualize reading among yourselves. Remember, I'm 10 hours a day on the same screens you are, sometimes with some of you. But reading on books, in text, or with purpose on screens, that is an act of resistance against what I've been talking about. An act of resistance in our landscape of continuous partial attention and continuous distraction. Because this kind of reading centers us, gives us a chance to remember even who we are, when, where, in this moment, this precious moment in time where we've barely survived our own plague. We can and should think about what reading can do for us and for the next generation. And I use the philosopher Martha Nussbaum, who said something that it's tough for some of you to hear this, but necessary. It would be catastrophic to become a nation of technically competent people who have lost the ability to think critically, to examine themselves, and to respect the humanity and diversity of others. This is not anti-digital culture. This building This enterprise, this dream of Maria Grazia Mattei is about diversity, cultural diversity. It's about innovation. This is not anti that, but it's suggesting that we must take care. Now, I really appreciated this message in the New York Times from the Pope. I was very, very surprised to read this, and I want to read it to you today. Where the danger is, also grows the saving power. That's from the poem Hyperion. That's the genius in the human story. There's always, always, always a way to escape destruction. Where humankind has to act is precisely there in the threat itself. That is where the door opens. I suggest to you, we cannot, must not, and should not go back, but we should not go forward without knowing what is being lost. And so the book that is translated by Vita and Pensiero that I wrote just recently, 2-3 years ago, I propose a new way of thinking about how we can build that deep-reading brain through its best medium for the young, which is print. The evidence is strong. So for the first 10, 12 years, we're building deep reading at the same time, parallel, just like Vygotsky, for those of you who remember Vygotsky. We have parallel formation of coding and programming. And my colleagues would tell you all the cognitive and linguistic processes that are being developed with that. This is not in opposition. It's in parallel growth. Let us do what is best in those early years and then have teachers who know how to teach deep reading and transfer it across not just the mediums we have today, but the mediums of the future. So I'm going to end with 2 last slides. This is from the novelist that I love most in America, Marilyn Robinson, and she said, "The greatest test ever made of human wisdom and decency may very well come to this generation or the next. We must teach and learn broadly and seriously." These lessons tell us it is not just what we read, but how we read. How we read will affect our future. And so I end by saying, this is a moment of opportunity and change for all of us. But knowledge should be leading us ever more in figuring out how our innovation can be both preserving our best and expanding us. So to develop a biliterate brain capable of knowing when to skim and how to read deeply across mediums, how we can design digital learning that redresses the weaknesses this whole talk is about, that is what I will hope for your future and mine for the next generation, so that we propel empathy, critical analysis, and the contemplative function of humankind. Thank you very much.
Bravissima. Beh,
Well, I think that there's plenty of food for thought now, and I think that this is the right time to exchange ideas between Maryanne and you. We also have so many people that are connected, so I'd like to start from the, people of the internet. I can see here some questions. Maybe Alessia or Costanza, can you read some of these questions so we can get some insights and we can really think and talk about all of the suggestions from Maryanne. I have to say that meat, I mean, this place is absolutely in compliance with the thoughts of Maryanne. I mean, we really would like to implement knowledge, encourage people to think and reflect. Okay, let's start with the questions. Now, from the network, there's a question to Maryanne. And someone says, so you think we were not born to read and that the human brain has been adapted to this new discovery, to this new knowledge of the world. So what are the obstacles that we have to remove between the brain and the world so that we can create a direct connection?
Beautiful, complex, but I will respond. I hope with a little beauty. Oh, come back here. Okay. So, what is amazing about the design of the brain is that it has principles for Can you hear this? It has principles for recycling. So what we literally do are taking areas of our brain that we use to recognize visual things like tracks, and we recycle them and use them to recognize letters, etc. So in, if you will, removing impediments, part of my work is to remove impediments to reading for children who read differently, like dyslexia or diverse learners. So one of the things we all want to do is to figure out which part of the circuit is not either connecting in time or in fact has been impoverished in some way. So one of the things that I will tell Maria Grazzi over dinner about is that some of our new research is to use digital screeners that will ask through games little questions so we can figure out where on the circuit there's an impediment. Is it in the language that the child never got in their home? Is it in their inability to process the tiniest sounds in a language called phonemes? Or is it the fact that, and very few children, that they really aren't using their visual system in the best way? So one of the things we're doing is trying to figure out at 5, and what I love about your question is that I believe if we do 2 things well, we can correct so much of the pain in the world of children who think that they're dumb because they can't learn to read, when it's just that we haven't learned what's wrong and what we can do to teach them. That's why I mentioned the program Eureka by Daniela Traficanti at Catholic University. What she's doing is trying to say, well, if the problem is this is what we emphasize. So the 2 things I would want the world to do, from 0 to 5, every hospital, everywhere, enhances the knowledge of parents that think, oh, if they can't understand, I shouldn't talk, or if I can't read, I shouldn't tell stories. I want everyone to read, talk, and sing. That's number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2, at 5, I want to answer your question. Mm-hmm. I want to see where are the impediments and what teaching will most help remove that impediment from the child. Those 2 things. You can imagine a child who is sick thinks they're sick forever. A child who can't read thinks they're a failure forever, and they think they're dumb or not working to potential, rather than the fact, and this is, I'm using your question a little bit for my own purposes. The fact is that 10% of our whole world, before literacy began, had this different organization. Not half, but 1/3 of the entrepreneurs, the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the United States and Britain, are dyslexic. 1/3. Well, it's a different brain organization. But I always ask the question, it's not about Einstein's brain, how many convolutions or where in the temporal lobe it looked bigger than others. It's the fact that Einsteins are in sweatshops. Einsteins are in prisons because at 4th grade, they were lost to the system. I have to be sure by 4th grade, our kids have the best we can do to get rid of impediments. So thank you for your questions.
Brava, bravissima. Bilateral brain. Un'altra domanda?
Okay, there's another question here. Okay, Antonietta, I know your name. Another scientist.
Counting versus reading, numeracy versus literacy? Thank you.
Yes. I think you already know that cognition, especially people in cognitive neuroscience, look at these as both inventions of society that formed new networks. But numeracy is actually a little more not more interesting. Nothing's more interesting than literacy, of course, to me. But it is very interesting because in our evolution, we have our primate cousins, who have some basic numeracy. If you give, as some experiments show, 3 bananas and 4 bananas, 4 is the banana bowl they choose. So there is some basic numeracy that is not the same. What we do have as an analog is drawing. In 70,000 years ago, we certainly have even signs that look like they could be a symbol for either number or perhaps a concept. We can't tell the difference, but it looks like, and Denise Bezerot always says the first letters were numbers because that's how they were used functionally. What is the symbol for the number of sheep or barrels of wine? So the correlative historically is that numeracy probably was there before literacy in the precursors, but in terms now we actually use some similar processes depending on the type of math. Algebra, very much different from geometry. So we use some of the same processes. And it is not coincidental that a group of children with dyslexia have dyscalculia because the impediments were in the shared processes. It's an interesting question.
Thank you.
Prego. Aspetta, ti devo dare il microfono perché...
Okay, please wait for the mic. We can't hear you, and we are also recording. Well, I have to say that questions and answers are so important. I mean, well, first of all, thank you so much. A wonderful presentation. I found very interesting. Thank you so much. My question is, okay, back to dyslexia in children. Do you think there's a lack of reading from parents for them from 0 to 5 years of age? Is there a direct correlation between dyslexia on the one side and not having been read by parents? Do you think it depends do you think it's more frequent, for example, in those children who missed reading? Okay.
Wonderful question. And there are 2 parts to the answer. First, dyslexia is a brain organization that we can see in infancy the first year before any parent reads a thing. So the work by Nadine Gabb and Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard shows us certain areas in that circuit that will go on to be the reading circuit simply are different in families with dyslexia. So there's a lot that is before reading ever occurs, that brain is different. But the second part of your question is that in my Boston lab, not my California lab, what we noticed was that the children who came to us with dyslexia later on, who had been read to greatly, had a different relationship to books and wanted more to learn. And so the affective component, which is so important in learning, was actually enhanced by all of that material that they had been read to. So they didn't have the same negativity. So it's a very good question. Good inference.
Grazie. Ancora una domanda? Prego, Michele.
Okay, one more question. Michele.
Reading, of deep immersive reading on the one hand, and the difficulties that younger generations have in doing this, how would you lure those younger generations into deep and immersive reading?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is such an important question. And please forgive me. I want you to answer it. Because I know that my students, for example, are reading, in literature, they're reading short stories. They're not reading Dostoevsky or George Eliot. They're reading short stories. They're reading graphic novels. And I think graphic novels have, just like radio, we don't, just like Hemingway and George Eliot, or, we need both. So to lure, this beautiful word, to lure them is, I think, an act that our faculties, and that's actually one of the things I wanted the faculty at Catholic University to hear. We have to give examples. We have to give examples of our love of literature. Half of what I sometimes do in my talks is literally lifting out passages from beautiful books that I'm giving away a hint of the reading life. So I don't have an answer, but I hope you will work on one. We really need it. We need it desperately. And I have 2 sons. Now, I will say, for my sons, the audiobook has been a real help. Now, I have one son who's dyslexic, so for him, the audiobook, he's never read a book I've ever written. Never. But he has listened to them. And there are problems with audiobooks. You don't go back. You don't monitor your comprehension as well. But it's still a good source. So I look to you to help answer your question. I truly, we have to do it. We have to.
Io non so, farei un applauso per questa passione.
Well, we need to share a big round of applause for the passion you convey. And now, personally, I've taken and I've learned so many important points in all the things you said, because what I like in your stream of thought is that you don't deny that there's a key process. We go towards innovation, digitization. The point is, how can we have critical thinking back at the center of this transformation process? How can we prevent ourselves from losing, this new strength? We don't know where we're going, but what is important is that we don't have to lose the possibility to insight, to go in depth. I think that all of this is really extraordinary, because your presentation, but I remember even 5 years ago, I understood it's not an issue of being, pros or cons, so in favor of technologies or against technologies. This is our reality. The point is how to face this, how to become aware of what's around us, and how to own the rules and the mechanisms around us. All of this is crucial because, of course, we don't want to be passive users of technologies, with no depth, okay? And so reading at the center of everything, I think this is an extraordinary indication. And I really, really hope that also the people, are connected remotely. I know that we have, schools listening to us, also thanks to the help from the Cariplo Foundation. I'm really sure that we have to avoid this kind of trap. You said it clearly, so we don't have to interrupt the process. There's no going back. So once again, we have to move forward, and we have to have this, analytical thinking, critical thinking in the new reality, which is, an important one, a dominating one in our life, especially when it comes to, how to, teach to, young students. So I think that all of these, critical contributions are so important. Any other question? Yes, there's another question from the network. When you read on paper and you are facing a screen, why does the density changes?
I think where it was right below anonymous. Will infinite scrolling have an attention right here, increasingly used in design and consequently could be a threat to deep reading? I think the person who asked this question knows the answer. Absolutely. The quality of attention for all of us is changing. We have to be very aware of ourselves. And I wrote an entire letter in this last book that was about the fact that my attention was dramatically changed and I did not know it. And it took me 2 weeks of concentration to return to the kind of reading that I felt was my home. But all of us are affected. I'm a reading scholar, and I thought I wouldn't be because I was aware. Not true. So we all have to be very aware of this. So the person who asked the question, definitely anything that changes your attention is going, and distraction, you are not giving time to the deep reading critical analysis.
Perfetto. Avanti, grazie. Dottor Bassetti.
About memory and reading.
It's changing quite a bit. The studies of memory are showing that we actually have shorter memory spans. And there are different ways of testing it, but indeed, you just think, we could ask here the uses of memory. Now remember how the Greeks had an extraordinary relationship to memory, and I remember the one, I'm forgetting the philosopher who stood in an earthquake and he remembered who was standing around everywhere. I mean, so there are different uses of memory, and Socrates worried that reading would be a recipe for forgetting. So each medium is changing our memory. So the question I would have here, how many of you have 10 poems memorized? Just how many of you? 10. 10. Okay, let's go down to 5. Let's go down to 5. 5, pretty good. Now let's go down to 2. How many have no poems memorized? Your question is really, there's a societal relationship to memory that is changing. But there's 2 forms. There's this form of memorization, but there's also a form of short-term memory that literally is changing. We are no longer, there have been all kinds of different studies that showing it. And people who are doing multitasking, that's another whole research on this. You think you are doing all this multitasking, but you're doing the surface. And if you really have to do the task well, often you have to go back and do that first task better. So, and there's a relationship between multitasking and memory. But it's a beautiful, hard question that I believe we're all changing. And the last thing I will say is that your question really hits me because of my work with kids. Because I want our children to consolidate, remember what they're learning, so that they don't believe that they only have to press a button and get an external platform of knowledge and not have an internal one. The danger, remember, everything is analogy to what you already know. They might not know when to press and get the information because they haven't remembered, they haven't consolidated knowledge. And the last thing I will say politically is that our schools who are not giving enough background knowledge and ensuring that knowledge gained by our students is part of the process, and who are just depending on the beautiful addition of educational technology, I'm worried that there will be so much dependence on the external that the internal won't develop as well as it should. So we've got so many different parts to your question. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bene, grazie. Allora,
Okay, then I know we may go on forever, but let's go back to reading books, including especially the books from Maryanne. And the first book, published by Vita e Pensier, is extraordinary. So, I would like to invite our friends from the Cariblo Foundation, maybe between the first meeting and then the second one, we may, make a list of fundamental crucial points. And, Alessandro is the coordinator of this project. And so we may have a sort of a minutes or report from these meetings. Of course, so you will find all of the recordings online so that we can have an in-depth reading. We will do this here in Meet, so we will keep, if you will, feed this stream of thoughts, growth and awareness.
I autograph books, that's fine, but I use it as an opportunity. You don't have, I'm sorry, Vita and Pensiero, you don't have to buy the book to ask me a question. It's my opportunity for people who have questions they don't want to have publicly stated, or there's just no time. I can do 1 minute answers. I'm like peanuts, Linus.
It's okay.
1 minute, 5
Allora, io mi mi impegno a convincere Maryanne a tornare, magari a fare ancora.
I will try and convince Maryanne to do some workshops with us. So
Importante, quindi tornare.
This is just the beginning of the story. I'd like to encourage and rediscover the pleasure of reading, which is the key point and the key target of the Cariplo Foundation's project. But we need also to understand mechanisms and rules in a digital environment that apparently cancels a reality. So once again, it's a new reality we have to come to terms with, but we need to recover, re-memorize, relaunch all what we have learned in a new environment. Mankind right at the center. Once again, thank you so much for attending. Next meeting will be next month in November, so the third around reading and Fondazione Cariplo evening. Okay, grazie. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Good night.